we've been witnessing the death of a number of arguments, and these were all the most popular arguments like 20 to 30 years ago. The first like detailed, in-depth argument someone gave me was the imam there. He showed me like an hour-long video on the scientific miracles of the Quran. That was an argument that was invented in the 1970s and which, Ali Dawah has said is now debunked, and Hamza Tzortzis has said is debunked, but this was the argument I was given in the 90s. The most popular one of like the Muslims at large was the miracle of the number 19. So if you just talk to an average like Muslim, they kept throwing, there's so many 19s, there's 19s everywhere, there's this code in this, so it's this Quran code. And then as far as tracks they were giving me, the one I remember is there was an entire pamphlet on Muhammad and Song of Solomon 5:16. These are the arguments, and they're all completely bogus. And any honest person will acknowledge that these are completely bogus arguments at this point, except for the number 19 and Shabir Ali. He seems to sincerely believe that this is a good argument. But with the numerical miracles and the scientific miracles, Muslims have a little bit more freedom to reject these arguments or say they've been debunked because they were just invented in the 1970s. They just came up with this stuff.
Even though we reject the claims of Rashad Khalifa himself, there are certain things about the Quran which are undeniable. This is about the book itself.
Okay, go ahead and give us the
book. Well, we find that the Quran actually draws our attention to 19 in a verse of the Quran in the 74th chapter, the 30th verse. Within the context, what it means is that there were 19 angels guarding hell. So it's not so much about the number 19 itself as a phenomenon in the Quran. It's just talking about 19 angels.
Yeah, it's interesting. So it's talking about hell, and we'll go ahead and look at the passage once Shabir is done, just to get an idea of what the passage is so everyone gets their bearings. Yeah, this is talking about, it just says over it are 19. That's a verse, and it's talking about, there's some dispute about whether this is like 19 angels who are punishing people, 19 commanders over the other angels who are punishing people, because there are hadiths that say there are tons and tons, there are thousands of angels and stuff like that there. So there's confusion about what this is referring to, but it's referring to the number of angels if you read it in context. And Rashad Khalifa apparently just 19, over it or 19, over what? Over it or 19, what is this number 19? And then plugs the number into his computer system and starts getting all these amazing instances of the number 19.
Rashad Khalifa took that to be 19 like as a pattern in the Quran. But so we were not saying this means that there is a 19 pattern in the Quran. It means there are 19 angels guarding hell. But at the same time,
what the heck are you laughing at, Thaddeus? This is brilliant. Stop bothering Shabir.
I was just thinking he's debunking his own argument as he's going.
Like, oh, you mean by saying, exactly and so basically this guy was a heretic and a lunatic and a completely insane person that we all rejected, and then he got by our guys, but we plugged the numbers and he's right on the money on some of it.
And not only that, the verse he went to, it totally doesn't mean that, but it still works.
He had this obsession with the number 19 because of this verse, over it or 19, which talk about 19 angels, and he thinks it's somehow like over everything and this mystical Allah's favorite number and so on that he's going to put it all over the Quran. And shocker, he went out and found it all over the Quran. Amazing.
And where it says over it are 19, that's in the 30th verse. The very next verse, the 31st verse of that 74th surah, explains in detail why God made 19 angels to guard hell. And it says that this is in order to strengthen the faith of the believers, even to give certainty to the people of the book who might be looking at the Quran. Now, this verse, which goes into such great detail explaining the wisdom behind the 19 angels, actually comprises 57 words, which is 19 times 3.
All right, so Shabir gives a bunch of examples, but they're like that. But you can find a lot of these examples of, look at this. There's a 19 here. Look at this number of words. It's 38, which is 19 times 2, and this is 57. This happens over and over and over again.
He talked about rolling dice, right? And what he said was technically correct. Like if you roll a 19-sided dice multiple times in a row and you keep getting 19, that would be very unlikely. The problem is the set isn't one and then another and then another. The set is infinite. So it's really roll a 19-sided die, essentially an infinite number of times, and take all of the things that work, ignore everything else, and then just say, wow, it's so amazing that all these things work. Because there's going to be an infinite number of things, because there's an infinite number of ways to manipulate numbers.
So you're saying this could be done pretty easily?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could, if you were motivated, you could do this with any text whatsoever.
And that's the thing. So it's like people are usually only motivated to do this with the Quran because of Rashad, and it's because of Rashad Khalifa. He came along and he was just a weird guy, and all of a sudden people had access to computers and he was interested in numbers, and he did this with the Quran. And all of a sudden it becomes a thing in the Quran. I mean, a thing for Muslim apologetics. All right, so this is Surah 74. And for a little bit of you see right there, 74:30, over it or 19. And this is interesting. This is one of those passages where you have all these little short verses, and then all of a sudden you get one verse that's like, I mean, it seems almost as long as the rest of the entire chapter put together. But let's go back. Allah's talking trash about Muhammad's enemies, and says, I will cast him into hell. So verse 26, I will cast him into hell, and what will make you realize what hell is? It leaves not, nor does it spare aught. It scorches the mortal. Over it are 19. 19 what? Well, he breaks it down. And we have not made the wardens of the fire other than angels. So the idea is that these 19s are some kind of wardens leaders over the other angels, something like that. And we have not made their number, but as a trial for those who disbelieve, that those who have been given the book may be certain. And so this is why it's suggested that maybe Christians and Jews had some idea about 19 angels, so that, those who have been given the book may be certain. How is 19 going to make us certain? Well, if they already had an idea, well, then Muhammad somehow confirming it means that you should confirm Muhammad, and you can know that he's a prophet. And those who believe may increase in faith, and those who have been given the book and the believers may not doubt, and that those in whose hearts is a disease and the unbelievers may say, what does Allah mean by this parable? Thus does Allah make err whom he pleases, and he guides whom he pleases, and none knows the hosts of your Lord but he himself. This is not but a reminder to the mortals. And then, of course, Allah starts swearing by the moon, even though Muhammad said that if you swear by anything other than Allah, you're associating it as a partner with Allah and worshiping it. But Allah does that a lot in the Quran. I swear by the moon and the night and the daybreak. He's just swearing by everything. Rashad Khalifa reads verse 30, over it or 19. Oh my goodness, this is telling us that the number 19 is going to occur miraculously throughout the Quran. One of the stupidest interpretations of any verse in the history of humanity. But lo and behold, he found the number 19 in a bunch of ways in the Quran. And now Shabir Ali is defending it. Yasser Qadi was giving a series of lectures on what the Quran says about hell. And when he's reading this passage, because it's about hell, he did this little detour to discuss this mathematical marvels argument. And Sheikh Yasser Qadi shares his thoughts. And obviously, since it's such a slam dunk argument, Shabir says that according to the next verse, this is meant to be a sign for people to give certainty to the people who've received the book and to put other people, in confusion or doubt or something like that. So obviously, Yasser Qadi is going to agree with Shabir Ali that this is a brilliant argument.
Turns out that pretty much all of it was fabricated. Like, who's going to actually sit and count the number of letters or words? So he's fabricating. And he concocted a very elaborate theory that he used computers at the time.
If people had access to it, which other people generally aren't going to be this weird, but they would have found out you could do this with all kinds of books. Pick up a book, use your computer to start figuring out numbers in there, and you'll find this all over the place.
So I saw an interesting question in the chat from Villainous. He says, does the 19th theory work on different versions of the Quran? And I say this is interesting because I've actually seen Quranists, right? Quranists are much more open in general about all kinds of things. But in this case, they were using 19 theory to compare all the versions of the Quran and kind of come back to the original text by comparing different Qurans and finding which verse the 19 works on in this Quran. Oh, that must be the correct version.
That is an issue that's been brought up. Like if you're counting the number of words that lead up to something, well, guess what? Different qira'at have sometimes different numbers of words, and they do their verses differently and so on. So what version are you you can't even say Hafs because this guy actually edited the Quran. And came up with his own, had to remove verses out of it to get this to work. Why is the Hafs version even the most popular? I mean, back in the day, if you go back not too long ago, different versions of the Quran were popular in different areas. Even in Egypt, it was a different version. The Hafs version became the most popular one because the Turks used the Hafs version, and they had the Ottoman Empire, and they spread the use of their version of the Quran. And then, of course, this one gets picked up for the 1924 Cairo edition. And then, of course, also in the age of Dawa, they make up, now there's only one Quran with no variants ever in the entire history of the Quran. What a disaster, man.
And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems on its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship it. Everyone whose name has been given before the foundation of the world in the book of the life of the Lamb who was slain. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who understands calculate the number of the beast. For it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. So John, the author of Revelation, he draws heavily on the Old Testament. He expects his audience to understand that he's referencing the Old Testament in various ways. In fact, there's probably like 500 allusions to the Old Testament in the book of Revelation. The number 666 is better understood as a symbol than a name. Yes, it uses the word name, but when you look in context, it's not really about a name. So the academic theory that this is about Nero, the Emperor of Rome, doesn't really hold up to scrutiny for that reason, and because you have to manipulate Nero's name to make it add up to 666. However, 666 is found in 1 Kings 10:14 and the parallel verse in 2 Chronicles. Now, the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. So the extravagant description of the income of Solomon, who's known for wisdom, and right, John said, this takes wisdom to understand this, is arguably the turning point in his career as he seeks foreign wives and political alliances to protect the wealth. The mark of the beast and the characteristic of the reign of the beast is economic. So you see a thematic connection here between Solomon, whose kingdom ends up falling because of his greed, and the mark of the beast. And then I said, this might be a bit like what Saudi Arabia is doing today, where they're trying to buy the world with their oil wealth. Now, we go from the serious exegesis to the somewhat proper exegesis. So the previous verse in 1 Kings, the one before the verse of 666, mentions the Queen of Sheba. And King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba all that she desired. So she turned back and went to her land with her servants. Sheba was probably the ruler of the Sabaean kingdom, and the Sabaean kingdom is down here at southern Arabia. Since Muslims always tell us that Kedar in the extreme northern Arabia, it is a hint that it's about Muhammad, well, then Saba must be about Muhammad too, because it's right next door to Mecca. It's practically the same geographic region, a lot closer to where Muhammad was than Mecca. And indeed, let's pretend that the Islamic narrative about Mecca is true. That is this great trade capital, that, oldest and greatest city, and all the trade of the regions going through it. Well, then, if that's true, then Sheba surely went through Mecca on her way to and from Israel. And the exact region of Sheba, so on the one map, it was kind of down here. On this one, it's over here, because the exact region of the geography is not that known. And if this one's correct, then it actually includes Mecca within the king of Saba. Now we have some fun, right? So that was the end of the responsible exegesis. But now we get to the real fun stuff, where we find the mathematical miracle 666 that Allah has chosen to encode in his holy book. Surah 66:6. I mean, it's 666. He's not even trying to hide it, right? Oh, you who have believed, protect yourselves and your families from a fire whose fuel is people and stones, over which are angels, harsh and severe. They do not disobey Allah in what he commands them, but to do what they are commanded. Incidentally, here's the 19 angels in this verse, 666. So Allah claims he's in charge of hell in this verse. He claims that the fallen angels of hell are not disobeying him, that they're following his commands. So Allah claims that he's in charge of hell in verse 666. Coincidence? Perhaps. Let's continue on. There's two 666s in the Quran, right? There's also Surah 666. But your people have denied it, meaning the Quran, while it is the truth. Say, I, meaning Muhammad, am not over you as a manager. So here we see that Allah has coded the entirety of the Islamic Trinity, Allah, Muhammad, and Quran, in just these two verses that are marked by 666. It's a mathematical miracle. But that's not all. There's more. If we start at the beginning of the Quran and we count 666 verses, then we continue reading on, we find, O men, a proof has now come from you to your Lord. We have sent down to you a manifest light. Does this sound familiar? It should, because it's a lot like Isaiah 14:12. How you are fallen from heaven, i.e. sent down, O day star, son of dawn, i.e. manifest light. So the manifest light being sent down from heaven, cast out of heaven in Isaiah 12:14, none other than Satan. And by the way, the previous verse, number 666, claims that Allah is the only helper of those who are disdained and who are arrogant, i.e. people who are rebellious against God. The only helper of them is Allah, according to the verse. So a 19 miracle can happen once every 19 verses by chance, shockingly enough. But a 666 miracle? Hey, that's only 1 out of a 666 chance. 35 times as unlikely as a 19 miracle. And what are the odds that the unholy trinity is covered by only the two 666 verses? There's only those 2 verses, and they cover all of the Islamic trinity. And with a bonus description of the fall of Satan connected to verse number 666. This is all beyond comprehension, or something like that. So Islam is the beast by the principle of mathematical miracles, and therefore Allah is Satan.
It's over for Islam.